why is it possible, and what are the points that make investment in automation a lot easier in Europe? Is that a perception? Is it reality? Why are the UK lagging behind adoption of automation and robotics in engineering and technology areas?
Hello and welcome to another edition of the MTD podcast. This one's coming from the FANUC automation event, which is happening here this week from November the 1st to November the 5th. This last event happened, I think it was in about 2019, so it's been a couple of years since they've opened the doors to the public. This is actually day 2, but this podcast will probably come out in days or weeks to come. So, and just to set the scene, there's so many automation solutions here. There's around about 45 partners. The week is awash with panel discussions, keynote speakers, and one of the contributors is with me today on this podcast, along with 2 gentlemen from MTD. So I will introduce first Andrew Armstrong, who is the European Sales Manager for FANUC. Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Paul. Good to be here.
Yeah, good. How are you doing? You're right. Wolves won last night, didn't they? So you must have come in on the front foot this morning.
Yeah, catching up Arsenal somewhere along the line.
Well, you probably are actually now. I think we're 6th now, aren't we? So you're what?
We're right behind you.
You're right behind. And I'm also joined by Rowan from MTDCNC. Good afternoon, Rowan.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good to be here.
And Gio as well, who seems to participate in the majority of these podcasts.
Oh, Paul, how are you doing? Right?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. Very good. And what we're going to touch on in today's podcast is one of the discussions that Andrew's just been involved in that's just concluded, which is about Europe investment in automation around Europe and how it's seen over there. Plus, we'll also talk about the event in general and the adoption of automation. But just to set the scene a little bit, Andy, it's been a great couple of days so far, and the panel discussion that you just had was about automation in Europe, wasn't it, and how you see it?
Yeah, correct. Obviously, in my role now, I've got a European role. Worked for FANUC for 8 years, and predominantly in the plastics industry, where automation is fairly standard. But we're now seeing, obviously, more and more investment in our European companies and subsidiaries into automation and what that looks like for customers and end users. And one of the things we were talking about today was really about why is it possible, and what are the points that make investment in automation a lot easier in Europe? Is that a perception? Is it reality? Why are the UK apparently lagging behind adoption of automation and robotics in engineering and technology areas?
And what came out of that? What were some of the reasons?
I mean, some of the reasons, one really good point that we just finished up on, actually, we probably could have talked about it for ages, was the perception of engineering. It's not a sexy industry, and how the Europeans view engineers, their stature within the business, who makes the decisions, and is engineering a dirty word still? Call it dirty, call it what you want, but it's not an industry that attracts people. Now, that may very well be a legacy of what an engineer used to do. You get your hands dirty, you fix things. And that's still the case.
But that was the same overseas as well. That's been the same everywhere. So how's that changed there and maybe not here then, if that's the case?
I genuinely think that the attitudes of businesses in Europe are on a total different mindset. They're run by engineers predominantly. You have financial people for sure. You have to keep your business on the right track, but the engineers make the key decisions and how to invest, what to invest in. For sure, they need to look, is it financially viable? Some other aspects is the investment term and the return on investment. The viewpoint is not to get it paid within a year, 18 months. They take a longer viewpoint, 3, 5, 7 years. And their strategies towards investment in terms of how can you look at robotics, how can you utilize it for one aspect, knowing that the end goal of where that robot and automation system may end up might be a totally different solution. So it's about being adaptable, flexible, and thinking not just in a way that puts a robot and a piece of automation together on the shop floor, but it also looks at how you can repurpose that. What's the future vision? What's the bigger goal? And I just get a reluctance in the UK that's not the process.
Do you think we're looking for a too quick a win then? What do you think, Gio, on that? I mean,
I think that, firstly, just going back to the point in Europe and Germany and Italy, I know that, in Italy, for example, not just Germany, if you are an engineer in Italy, that is a really highly respected job. And if you had a daughter, you'd be proud for your daughter to marry an engineer. That's not the case in the UK. And I think perception, not just in automation, but in engineering.
Is your wife's dad Italian?
No. But the perception generally in engineering needs to change in the UK massively. And I think it's got to come from the ground roots at schools. And I think that, what I've seen from going to colleges is that these people that are going to university to be an engineer, I know you've been to university for engineering, a lot of them want to bypass the shop floor because they think it's a dirty industry and go straight into design. But if you have not had that experience in metal cutting, how can you design a component without over-engineering that component? There's a massive area that needs to be addressed, in the UK. It's terrible.
Well, let's just bring Rowan in on this one. Rowan, you've been with MTD now a few weeks, and it's great to have youth back in the team, which is a really good thing, and someone that has been to university but is a passionate engineer as well. What do you think to what Gio's saying there? Is that very true?
I think there's a few points to make here. Obviously, the European attitudes towards engineering, I think, as Tom mentioned, Andy mentioned, are very, very different. And I think in Germany, you can't call yourself an engineer unless you have a degree. And I don't necessarily think that having a degree makes you an engineer necessarily. And that's a really good point Gio made, that actually in the UK, you find that people on the shop floors they don't necessarily have the degrees, but I would argue they probably have more experience and more knowledge and more applicable practical knowledge than you might find postgraduates coming out with. And I've got a few good stories of university friends who were part of kind of rail engineering societies, and they were designing covers and stuff, and they totally over-engineered stuff. And as a result, stuff was... I could go into it, but it was made wrong. And when he was explaining these stories to me, even I was just doing my apprenticeship at the time, and it made a lot of sense to me how they could make those really obvious mistakes. But all it took for me was 6 months of hand fitting, and I would... If I put myself in those shoes, I'd know how to fix those. But these were people with engineering degrees, doing their masters or doing their doctorates, and there's not that practical knowledge that you get from university.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there, Rowan. And one of the aspects we talked about in a minute ago was about we need different levels of engineers. We need different levels with people with practical experience, with experience in those who can program, those who can design, and those with the high level knowledge that you're going to get from university, but they don't always make the right engineer to fully make the solution. There's a blend, and I think one of the aspects there comes back to our education system and how we educate engineers in the UK industry. We have apprenticeships, we have degree courses, and do you fall into an apprenticeship when you leave school because you don't know what to do, or is there a desire to go into it? And I think there's a promotional aspect there that we need to raise the bar. We also need to fill that void of experience. How do you put the experience into people to give them those practical aspects that they need in their job roles and the day-to-day work environment? Maybe some people are more readily accepting of that practical aspects than the academic aspects, and that's from my perspective, we got to find the balance and train lots of people in lots of different ways.
I mean, I fell into engineering. I wanted to be an architect, but then I looked into it. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I was at school, and the only thing that I did like was design. I wanted to be an architect, but then I looked into a degree, and it was 8 years, and I wanted to start earning money. My dad was a sheet metal worker and kind of in engineering. He said, "Joe, get a trade," and I fell into engineering. Never wanted to be an engineer. Never crossed my mind, and I think there's a perception of parents, because it's not promoted at schools or by the government. You see a politician go into an engineering shop and it's an old pillar drill with grease on the floor, that there's still that perception that it's a dirty trade and that it's potentially a dead-end job if you're on the shop floor as a machinist. But I honestly believe some of the best engineers in the world start their trade on the machines, because you get that real in-depth knowledge, and the opportunities that can come from being on the shop floor, if you push yourself, are absolutely endless, in my opinion.
Well, it was always seen when I left school. I was one of a collective of mates who was the only one to leave school at 16 and go and do an apprenticeship. And I was the butt of all the jokes then. It was like, oh, Jones is going to go and do this, you know, he's going to go and, yeah, they thought he was a mechanic. Were you going to fixing cars, taking clutches out? But the reality is then you go and sit with them on an aircraft and you're taken off to go on holiday somewhere. And you say, do you know how that engine works? How does that engine work? Then how does the plane work? What, those bits are made like that? And they're actually genuinely interested in what is the exciting and interesting part of engineering, isn't it? It is fascinating. So what do we do to address this, Andy? What came out of the panel discussion?
Well, I think there's lots of viewpoints, and from a supplier perspective of automation and understanding of how we invest in our people in FANUC UK, we need a balance. You know, how can we support that balance? What can we do to train the people? How can we give them the wider experience? But we also need to engage with the educational establishments. We need to somehow promote a better viewpoint of engineers and what that means. You know, how many people really go out and have aspirations to be an engineer? You know, what we've just said then, you know, both me and Gio fell into engineering. Our parents said, you're not going to, you know, you need to go and get a trade. Is probably a phrase that's been used millions of times.
It was the same for me. Yeah.
Which is great, because we've all done, you know, had great lives in engineering, and it's a diverse industry to be in. There are many job roles that you can go into once you start your training, understand what that looks like. But we have to change somehow the perception of engineering in the UK. You know, we talked about it 2 years ago about making sure that people have to aspire to be engineers. What's the meaning of that? You know, and how is it understood as a job role?
As the youngest person in this room, Rowan, how do you think, you know, when you're obviously with your colleagues and of a similar age, would they be interested in a career in what you're doing, or is it, what are we doing wrong for them to not want to be, if that was the case?
So first of all, I think it's interesting you mentioned you kind of you were not, obviously you weren't bullied, obviously, but you were taking the mick out for dropping out at 16, which is exactly what I did, and I got taken the mick out of as well. Obviously, maybe it's a little bit more recent memory than yourself.
Yeah,
you didn't say I'm very young at least a couple of times already. You've hammered the point home. But I did get, my friends kind of thought that it was, the BTEC wasn't really worth anything. They were all doing A-levels. They all went to university straight after they finished their A-levels. And I'm talking to quite a few of them now who've done kind of archaeology degrees and other degrees that don't necessarily go straight into an obvious job role. They said, actually, Rowan, you probably chose the right decision doing an apprenticeship. And it wasn't actually my choice. It was basically, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I liked breaking and making and fixing bikes, computers and whatnot. And my dad just said, oh, look, there's this new training college just open. Why don't you go there and do a BTEC? I was like, go on then. I had absolutely no idea what a machine was. And I think it's quite interesting that none of us actually knew what engineering was really until we were put on that road. And I think it's something you do fall into, and it's not something you can force. So saying that the education system should put out some schemes, I think there's probably no scheme yet that has actually produced a passionate engineer. I think people just fall into it and realise they love it.
Awesome points there, Rowan. I was actually going to ask you, why did you get into engineering? I didn't realise that it was the same as us. I was going to ask you, why did you choose engineering? And I watched the last bit of your talk about rebranding engineering, because you've got civil engineers, you've got mechanics, you've got you talk to people that are not in our industry, they don't really know what you actually do or what it actually entails, and they don't realise it's at the forefront of all technology. You've got these Formula One companies in the UK, you've got these space companies in the UK, and we've been dealing with colleges and universities at MTD, and one of the main reasons I wanted to join MTD was to try and change the perception of engineering, because I knew when I was on the shop floor that we weren't treated like doctors and dentists, like the European. You're not treated in the same way. The pay levels are not as high. And when I go now and visit these colleges and universities, you've got the one in Nuneaton, and I'm sure they won't mind me saying this, because I go there and the teachers, they can't, and this sounds like I'm putting them down, but I'm not. They can't afford to get teachers from industry to teach the students. So the people that are actually teaching them are not from industry, so they can't raise their awareness to what's actually out there and what's actually possible within engineering. So, for example, I went there, they still had all of the old conventional lathes, which I think is still the best way to start your apprenticeship. But then when moving into the CNC department, it was all kind of eroding machines and not CNC lathes and CNC milling machines, which didn't make any sense. And because they can't install that passion that we've got, because they've not been in it, they can't teach them something that they don't know.
Yeah, I think to add to that, Gio, I mean, one of the things I think we noticed, certainly when I did my apprenticeship 35 years ago-ish now, there were colleges, further educational establishments had 3, 4, 5 machine workshops. It was they were there and historically trained the people in those areas where there was lots of engineering prospects. And you look at those colleges now, they've had to adapt and change and re-look at what courses they're offering. And we've had we go back to, there's been quite a big void in engineering because UK PLC is not invested in those engineering skill sets, the companies. Part of that, from my perspective, has to be driven by government and to make sure that we are efficient and a manufacturing force for the future. But if you look at the general aspects of UK, what are we now? We're more of a service industry than we are a manufacturing powerhouse. How can we readdress that balance a little bit? We're never going to change it back to what it was, but we have great engineers. We have there is no difference in the capabilities of the people in the UK with the rest of mainland Europe.
And do you think we can become a greater powerhouse with the adoption of automation then across industry? And do you think it's got to be the
new jobs, Paul? These jobs that are going to be created. When people talk about, we don't want to invest in automation, it's going to get rid of jobs. It will get rid of certain tasks, but those tasks will free up people to do other jobs in other skilled areas of a business and help them be more efficient. There are jobs that will be created on the back of investment in automation. You need people to fix the robots. Not a FANUC obviously because they never go wrong. But you've got programmers, you've got controls engineers, and how do you develop your skill sets within a business to create greater added value?
It's the software in them as well. How do you develop that? The intelligence part of it. I mean, when we were at EMO, the one FANUC theme, if you went back 4 or 5 EMOs ago, let's say, 5-10 years, what have you, you had machines there without automation on, didn't you? But now every machine had something that was showing it being fed, pick and place, vision systems, measurement, all in one. So it's very clear that this is the path that FANUC is taking. One of the things that we're coming back to some of the points that you were talking about during your panel discussion. For me, I look at it, we try and look at it, and Lindsay made this point on stage earlier on in one of the discussions about the fact that let's look at it from the grassroots, from an SME, a small guy. We go into hundreds, thousands of these companies every year. And always the big thing is it's money and time. Have I got the money to buy in automation? Have I got the time to worry about how to learn how to use it? Not today. Come and see me tomorrow. And it's that, trying to get over that. And I think the funding aspect, I wonder whether in Europe, and you may or may not know the answers to this, is there any more support with the funding to adopt these technologies than we have here? And let me take that one step further before you answer, because what I was thinking is there not a way, and I challenged one of the other guests on this, of having, a kind of pay-as-you-go automation system. We'll come and work out the call it the turnkey element. We'll do everything for you, and then you just pay per piece part or something like that. Get rid of all the risk.
Yeah, I think to answer the first part of that question, there are certain investment supports for areas in Europe, depending on what that looks like. It's not necessarily all about investment in automation. It might be investment in energy efficiency equipment. It might be to support areas that are a little bit more behind in terms of unemployment levels. And fundamentally, there are and is support in lots of different countries. For sure, the government here in the UK, they give tax breaks for investment. Do people utilise those tax breaks enough to be able to put that back into the business, or are they using the money in a different way to support the business? Those are the things that we see, but how can you really answer that? You need quite a few different companies to come to the table and get different perspectives.
Yeah. What about the second point about on the spread, putting equipment in? Is that possible? Does that work? I mean, it happens in other areas of industry, doesn't it?
I think for there, what sort of equipment's going in? If it's a piece of automation, if it's just an asset in terms of a robot, it becomes easier. You've got a value to that robot, but it's got to do a task. So you've got to then add a gripper arm, you've got to add services, you've got to look at what the automation cell looks like.
Health and safety aspect.
Yeah, and everything around providing a solution. And typically, if you've got an automation solution, the robot investment part is somewhere between sort of 10 and 20% of the overall cost of the cell. So it becomes then a little bit more difficult to manage that on a pay-as-you-go scheme. It's more manageable when you have a more of a fixed asset like a robo drill or an injection molding machine, ROBOSHOT. Then you can potentially look at those investment programs. But that we're talking about automation, bringing people into that automation world to fundamentally do tasks that are either a little bit more stressful to do in terms of repeatability, to keep you'll be more efficient with your processes.
Yeah, it's a good answer.
So Andy, do you feel, so I think you mentioned, Paul, you kind of mentioned the word hump, as if like people are going to get over this time, money spent on the assets and time spent learning the assets and how to use them effectively. Do you feel like, Andy, that there is sorry, excuse me, I forgot what I was going to ask then. Do you feel actually obviously quite a lot of SMEs, especially SMEs, are probably working absolutely flat out, using all of their staff to be loading jobs rather than actually looking at process development and process improvement, where there's actually this activation energy, if you know what I mean, where people, if they had that extra month or two to design the turnkey process, to talk to a robot integrator, to put the investment in, then suddenly they free up one staff member to do more process improvement, and then it's a runaway system where they can keep going. Yeah. But they need to first get over that hump.
Correct.
It's
making that first step, and one of the points we talked about, this is why we're here. We have lots of skill sets. We have tools at our disposal that can prove systems without making the investment to start with. So it's about de-risking what you want to do, and you don't. And in those smaller SMEs, they don't have big engineering departments. In fact, some of them don't have the right skill sets to be able to start thinking about how do I automate. That's why, as a robot manufacturer, we have lots of different integrators with specializations in lots of different sectors. What works? How do you want to do it? And those people have many, many years of experience, so they can bring those solutions already to the table. And one thing that we talked about half an hour ago, or maybe an hour ago, was don't make it too complicated. What do you want to do? What do you want to achieve? And we should have the tools and the skill sets to be able to provide an answer that gives you the next step effectively.
Andy, is there an argument to say that SMEs should invest in automation more than anyone else? You mentioned time.
I think that's the case.
You mentioned time. They ain't got time to look into it, but ultimately, automation is going to give them time because they can start running 24/7 unmanned.
It's that working in the business or on the business, isn't it?
Well,
if you can separate the two. And
iSpec, and Superstar Components, these are owners of companies, relatively small companies, that were too invested in doing the day-to-day tasks that they couldn't find the time to grow their business because they were too heavily invested in doing tasks that a robot could do. By bringing in the robot, it's freed their time to then look at the business from a broader perspective and to put new strategies in place to grow it. And also through the automation, it's giving them consistency, it's giving them quality of part. They can start scheduling work out more accurately. Why are there such barriers to entry? Why are they not seeing the light, Andy? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no, it doesn't make sense to when we talk about it a lot. I think a lot of SMEs, they don't have a lot of free time to think about these things. They don't, they're concentrated on their businesses, and rightly so. They want to make sure their business is successful. They want to be here tomorrow and for the future. But what I will say is, if you want to be here really for tomorrow and the future, there are some steps that you need to consider to be more efficient, and that process is investing in automation.
It's a bit like, I'm sure you guys experience the same in your domestic life, in your household. You've got bills for electric, your TV, your Sky, whatever it might be. And sometimes I just don't have the time. And I know I'm not doing things right in that area. I know there are cheaper and more efficient ways for me to cover all these costs. And it's almost like if someone came in and audited my household, they would go, do you know what? You could spend 40%, 60% less and I'll take care of all that for you. All right, well, show me how you're going to do it. And I know that's the sort of solution that Fanuc can provide. And this might be, I think, the opportunity for people to go, do you know what? I don't know the answers to this, but if you're saying that automation is the future, then perhaps you should come and spend a day with me, look at how I'm doing things and look at what you can implement. Tell me how much it's going to cost and tell me how much it's going to save. That is how I see it in simple terms, because that's what I need in my life. I need someone to come to me and go, you need that. And if you do all that, it's going to cost you this, but it's going to save you that. And I do find there's still a resistance to that, but I think that could be the best way to address these things.
No, it sums it up really.
So you have the same problem with your household bills, do you?
All the time. Yeah. I'm never there, so it's like, I don't know how it functions. But
there's a human factor in that, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. So, I think you're right there, Paul. It's people. You have to change your mindset. What are you looking at? We get very fixed a little bit in the ways that we do our job and roles, and we take. It takes a bit of time to step back from that and start to think in a different dimension, a different direction. But there are lots of integrators and automation experts there that, we're readily here to talk to anybody about their automation requirements. And we'll be honest, if it's not viable, we'll tell people. We're not here to sell them a system because we that's our job. We're happy to. We want it to be successful. And we want people to, get a happy experience in automation. And maybe that's a point in the past where people are a little bit more reluctant to invest, where they've had problems with automation that's gone wrong. But maybe they've done it in a way that's too complex to start with, so it was always destined to fail. We try and look at it in a more simplistic, start with some easier tasks, build your knowledge and experience up, and then, you can start to use some of the more intelligent functions like vision, with the robots to understand how to do simple tasks. So, that's coming more and more, and that'll be, enhanced and developed over the next few years. The robots are getting eyes. The vision systems are there. How good are they? What can you do with them? And that will bring a lot more stability. I'm not saying stability, but a lot more ease of automation to invest in it, to install it, and to make a solution work.
That's very good. We've almost been running for half an hour, guys. So I'm going to bring this one to a close. Quickly, well, not quickly, yeah, but you two guys, Rowan, Gio, anything to add to this before I finish?
Last thing for me is we were talking to one of your colleagues earlier, Andy, and he came up with a great analogy, really, a Japanese analogy about, the best time to plant a tree would be 20 years ago. And if you haven't planted it 20 years ago, the best time to plant it is now. And if you look also from me, you look at the automotive industry, and that is just completely automated and it's as efficient as it can possibly be. They would not be able to make a penny on a car or have the margins in the car at all. They'd be making cars at a loss if it wasn't for automation. And if we want to be competitive globally, and now we've come out of Brexit, we really do need to be. We need to be manufacturing our own products, low volume or high volume, doesn't matter. But if we want to be competitive globally and sell around the world, we need to automate. And we really do.
And from the younger generation?
I'm just saying it's all about the low volume high mix. We've been talking about this.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Past 3 weeks I've been here.
And you should come here and learn about automation. So much to learn.
Definitely.
Andy, your new role in Europe, all going good?
Yes,
Enjoying
very
it?
good. Yeah, lots of things to do.
Fakuma was a good show.
Fakuma was very good. Yeah, good technology on show. Visitor numbers were obviously down because of COVID, but fundamentally we had some very good inquiries from that, and great job by you guys as well.
Thank you.
Doing the filming.
And your expectation this week?
Really, just promote.
If there's one thing you could get out of it, it's one thing you were thinking that you could come out at the end of this week going, we achieved.
Yeah, I think the message about getting people to think about automation that is key. That's what we did 2 years ago. We've actually in the UK, if you look back, one final point for me is we've taken a step back in terms of our adoption of automation over those 2 years in the UK. We're falling further behind in the league table of countries. Yeah.
Wow. Right.
So we're dropping down. There's people overtaking the UK. How can we need to change that mindset.
Even though FANUC in the last 2 years here in the UK has done phenomenally well, we're still that gap. Wow. Okay. Incredible way to end this. Kind of a positive note, but
but it's a message for the future.
Yeah.
Thought-provoking.
Yeah, definitely thought-provoking. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, that is just over 30 minutes. Another great podcast. Andy, thank you very much for your time. And of course, you can visit the FANUC website, fanuc.co.uk, to find out any more about their products and solutions. And I'm sure this event will be happening again next year. It is annually.
Every 2 years.
It's every 2 years, is it? So in 2 years' time again, but it's definitely worth visiting. And of course, you can come here at any time to look at some of the automation solutions and hardware and software that they have. Thank you very much for your time, guys.
Thanks for listening to the MTD podcast. If you found value in this episode, please subscribe and leave a rating and review. Find more episodes on mtdcnc.com.